improve access and the price of health care to the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, the legislation that is currently pending before this body, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, S. 815, provides an historic opportunity for us to advance civil rights in this country, to end employment discrimination against lesbians, gays, bisexual, and transgender, the LGBT community. The United States has shown international leadership against discrimination, promoting better understanding and tolerance around the globe. That has made the security of countries better. It's provided opportunities for minority communities, and the United States has been in the forefront of those efforts. We have shown leadership internationally, and we've done that because we have taken action in our own country to protect against discrimination. Action at home helps us to provide that credibility for our international leadership. The passage of S. 815, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, would demonstrate that action, that we've taken the right action at home, and therefore we have the standing to promote better understanding globally. The U.S. leadership has been shown in many different ways. I'm very proud that one of the primary organizations that the United States has participated in that has advanced human rights is the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Our local arm in participating is the Helsinki Commission. I have the honor of chairing the Helsinki Commission that includes members of both the House and Senate, along with members of the administration. We have used that role in the Helsinki Commission to promote an international agenda to deal with best practices to end discrimination on ethnic communities, religious communities, and racial discrimination. As a result of U.S. leadership, we've made a difference. We've made a difference in Europe. We've made a difference in North America. We've made a difference around the world. Today, there are special representatives under the OSCE to promote tolerance in regards to minority communities on race, the Muslim community, and Jewish communities. We've made a difference in the Roma population in Europe, which has been badly discriminated against. We have had conferences to deal with anti-Semitism to help the Jewish communities of Europe. And we've helped religious minorities around the region. Now, the U.S. leadership is needed to help the LGBT community. We've seen countries in Europe take discriminatory actions to marginalize lesbians and gays and those who, because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, have been discriminated against. In order to do that, we need to pass the legislation before us, to give us the moral ground and to promote the core values of our country. America's core values are based upon equal rights for all citizens, and that's what we need to promote by the passage of this legislation. I must tell you, it also is important for economic advancements. If we're going to be able to adequately compete globally, we need to empower all of the people of this country. We can't leave anyone behind. I am proud of what's happened in my own state of Maryland. Maryland's had a proud history of advancing civil rights for all of its citizens. This past weekend, I had an opportunity, I guess the weekend before that, to join in the 25th anniversary of Equality Maryland. In 25 years, they have changed the landscape in regards to the LGBT community in my state of Maryland. We've passed many laws that have advanced protection for all of our citizens in our state. We have the state of Maryland's passed laws. We've had local governments pass law. Baltimore City has passed the law. Baltimore County, Montgomery County, Howard County, the list goes on. And Maryland, not only did our legislature pass marriage equality, it was petitioned to referendum, and the voters in Maryland approved marriage equality. So we have taken steps in our state to advance the rights of all of our citizens, including the LGBT community. It's been nearly a half a century since we passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prevents discrimination in employment based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. That's been our law now for almost a half a century. ENDA, the legislation before us, would expand that to sexual orientation and gender identity. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 has worked. It has worked. It has provided an enforcement mechanisms for those who have been discriminated against in their employment because of their race or because of their religion or because of their national origin or because of their sex. It has worked. ENDA would expand that protection for sexual orientation and gender identity. It's time that we do this. Now, 21 states have already acted, including my state of Maryland. We've passed laws. 17 states include gender identity. Federalism has worked. What do I mean by that? Well, we have seen that there's a national law. The law is the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It set up the framework so that everyone understands that we won't tolerate discrimination in the workplace. It has had a workable way where those who are victimized can get remedied, because the real remedy we want is equal opportunity for employment of all the citizens in this country. It has worked. Our states have said we can go further. We can protect the LGBT community. And they have. And it's worked. And those who have said, look, we're going to have problems because of religious organizations or we're going to have problems because of this group, that has not been the case. Federalism has demonstrated that it's now time to pass a national law to protect against those who discriminate on employment on a person's sexual orientation or gender identity. We need a national law. Now, Mr. President, I could give you many specific examples that have been shared with us. We could talk the numbers. We know the numbers. I'd like to talk about specific cases. I could talk to you about, let me just mention two people. Kimya has a master's degree in social work and nearly 2 decades of experience in the field. She was the manager of a unit of long-term care facility for those suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia. She enjoyed her job and was good at it, but suffered through nearly a year of threatening messages, vandalism to her car, and slurs uttered in the halls. She was fired, her supervisor telling her, "This would not have happened if you were not a lesbian." Let me tell you a case of Linda. Linda is an attorney who relocated to this region because her partner accepted a faculty position with a local university. Linda was invited for a second interview with a local law firm. During that interview, Linda was asked why she was moving to this region, and she replied that her spouse had taken a position at a local university. The law firm asked Linda to come back for a final interview, which would include a dinner with all partners and their spouses to make sure that they all got along. At that point, Linda told one of the partners of the law firm that her spouse was a woman. Soon afterwards, Linda was told that the firm would not hire a lesbian and she should not bother coming in for the third interview. Now, in Kimya's and Linda's cases, they live in states that do not have protection for the LGBT community, and therefore there was no way to address this wrong. The legislation before us has been endorsed by the Leadership Council on Civil and Human Rights that represent over 200 civil rights, religious, labor, and women's rights organizations. It has broad support. It is supported by the American people. It is the right thing to do. It represents our core values. Our former colleague, Senator Ted Kennedy, said that civil rights was the great unfinished business of America. We're on that path. The passage of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act would be a major step forward to making us a more perfect union. I urge my colleagues to support the legislation, and with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Oregon.
President, I appreciate the comments my colleague from Maryland, who has argued so well that the time has come to take a bold step in favor of equality, in favor of fairness, and pass the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. I, too, rise to speak to the importance of this action. The Declaration of Independence, in its second paragraph, says, in words that are famous and well known to all Americans, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Certainly, that vision of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness is infused into everything we pursue in this nation for the success of individuals and the success of our families and the success of our communities and the success of our nation. And the debate on which we are about to embark is deeply connected to this debate, because certainly the ability to be free from discrimination in the pursuit of a job and to be free from discrimination in the course of employment is central to that pursuit of happiness. It is central to the issue of liberty. I rise today to say how important and vital this is to millions of Americans for whom discrimination has blocked and compromised the vision laid out in the Declaration of Independence. And this bill, this framework for ending discrimination in employment, Senate Bill 815, is born with a lot of bipartisan partners whom I'd like to thank at this moment. It was back in 2009, my first year in the U.S. Senate, that Senator Kennedy and his team asked me to take leadership of this bill that he had held near and dear to his heart, to carry the torch forward in fighting for fairness in employment, fighting for an end to discrimination. And since that time, many have stepped forward to be partners in this journey. Senator Collins was the first chief co-sponsor from the Republican side, stepping forward and taking her voice and her energy and her experience and her insight to bear. And after 2 years, she passed the baton to Senator Mark Kirk, who has been a longtime champion of the vision of fairness and equality for all Americans. Both of them have done an outstanding and extraordinary job in forwarding this dialogue. And on the Democratic side, we have first and foremost Senator Kennedy, who carried this leadership for many years, including back in 1996 when we had this on the floor of the Senate. And I'll return to that in due course. He's a champion for civil rights in many, many different parts of our world, including race discrimination and gender discrimination and discrimination against the LGBT community. And Senator Harkin, who chairs the Health, Education, and Labor Committee that carried this bill forward through two hearings in 2009 and 2012, who carried it forward in the markup this last year and who's prepared to send it to the floor. Thank you, Senator Harkin, for your leadership. And Senator Tammy Baldwin, who came to us with her personal story, who came to us with her experience of leadership from the House to extend the conversation here in the Senate, and has carried on so many individual meetings to speak to these core issues of equality and fairness and opportunity. So thank you to this bipartisan set of sponsors, and thank you to everyone who last night said, yes, we should debate this issue. We should debate this issue of discrimination blocking full opportunity for millions of Americans. And so shortly we will be engaged in that debate. After the Declaration of Independence, we had the preamble to the Constitution. And this also is well known to Americans across the land. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States of America. So here we have those core concepts of justice and the blessings of liberty for that generation, the generations that would follow. What exactly is liberty? What is freedom? Senator Kennedy, in 1965, in a commencement address to Howard University, said, "Freedom is the right to share fully and equally in American society, to vote, to hold a job, to enter a public place, to go to a school." Senator Johnson continued, "It is the right to be treated in every, President Johnson continued, "It is the right to be treated in every part of our national life as a person equal in dignity and promise to all others." I think it's a pretty good description of what liberty and freedom means, a right to participate fully in American society in every respect, at the voting booth, in the job place, and in the public square as you would choose to participate. So the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which ends discrimination against our LGBT community, is rooted in the best of American values. It's rooted in the concepts of liberty and freedom in our founding documents and our founding vision. It's rooted in the concept of fundamental fairness. How unfair is it if an individual who is seeking to apply to a job cannot have a full opportunity for that job, a full opportunity to thrive because of discrimination? How fair is it, because of who you are outside of the workplace, that you are fired from the workplace? Let us think of the golden rule. We all learned this early in life, that we should treat others according to how we would want to be treated. And we will all want to be treated with respect and dignity that President Johnson referred to. It is a vision of equality that was in the Declaration of Independence, and it's the vision of opportunity that's rooted so deeply in the American dream. The idea that in America, if you work and study hard, you can do just about anything. No, that's a vision my father gave to me when he took me to the schoolhouse doors when I was small, and he said, if you go through those doors and you study hard here in America, you can do just about anything. But discrimination takes away from that vision of opportunity. It says, if you study hard here in America, you can do just about anything unless you have a certain color of skin, unless you have a certain gender, unless you have a certain gender identity or sexual orientation. Now, we've struck down many of those barriers. We've advanced on this vision of equality, but we have further to go. That's what this debate is about. In 29 states, you can still be fired from the job. You can still be told not to apply in the beginning because of your sexual orientation or your gender identity. In 29 states. It should not be the case that the vision of equality and fairness and opportunity happens to occur on one side of a state line, but is destroyed if you cross that state line. Because this vision of opportunity and fairness and equality that's in our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence didn't say that this vision is only if you live in particular states, only if you live in the 21 states that have protections for our lesbian, gay, and bisexual community, or only if you live in the 17 states that have protections of employment for our transgender community. The journey of this legislation began in 1974. It was a year after Stonewall. 39 years ago. Bella Abzug and Ed Koch introduced in the U.S. House of Representatives legislation that would ban job discrimination. And it took another 19 years before such legislation was introduced here in the U.S. Senate. And hearings were held in the Labor and Human Resources Committee in 1994. And it was 2 years later that the bill was debated here on this chamber, right here, in this very room. And the outcome was 49 for, 50 against, with Vice President Gore sitting right now in the presiding chair where the senator from Hawaii sits. Now, Vice President Gore had already clarified where he stood. So we were missing one senator and one vote. And the result is it's been 17 years since this conversation was held in this chamber. 17 years of discrimination through so many states across America. It's time to end that discrimination and enhance the vision of equality and fairness. Well, today we have a bill that has before us 55 co-sponsors. Now, when we think about that 49-50 vote 17 years ago, we might say, well, isn't this a done deal? There are 55 co-sponsors. You only need 51 or 50 plus the vice president to pass a bill in the U.S. Senate. But it's not a done deal because in the last decade and a half, the Senate has gone from being a simple majority chamber as envisioned in the Constitution to being a chamber where every action takes a supermajority vote. We needed a supermajority of 60 to get on to the bill last night, and everyone anticipates we'll need 60 votes to get off the bill, that is to close debate and have a final vote. That's not the Senate that's been with us through 200 years. It's the Senate of the last 10 years, where the courtesy of extended debate has been turned into the veto of a supermajority. But that is where we stand right now, and therefore we need 60 votes. And we had 61 votes last night to get onto this debate, and I thank every one of those 61 senators who stood up and said, yes, after 17 years, it's time to debate this issue. Yes, it is right to consider issue of core fairness to millions of Americans. Yes, it is right to recognize that we should have a debate about the impact of discrimination on the ability of the individual to have full opportunity in our nation. So thank you to the 61 senators who stood up last night. Have no doubt, discrimination is alive and well. I'll share with you a story of Laura from Portland, Oregon. Before Oregon had non-discrimination clauses, which we adopted in 2007. And she notes that from 1980 to 1996, she worked for the Josephine County Sheriff's Office in Grants Pass, Oregon. She had the rank of sergeant. She was promoted often. She worked as a variety of capacities, including as a SWAT team commander, as a detective in the Major Crimes Unit, and in the Narcotics Task Force. During her 16 years, she notes, she says, I received numerous commendations, including commendations for removing an automobile accident victim from a burning vehicle, delivering a baby alongside a roadside, disarming an armed man intent on harming himself. She was awarded for her expertise and diligence shown in a number of complicated criminal cases. She was named Deputy of the Year in 1994. She taught law enforcement classes at Royal Community College and at the Oregon Police Academy. She had a distinguished employment record. But then, on Labor Day 1995, she was in a remote area when a police dog attacked her and did some damage to her leg, and she was put on administrative leave. And during the month that followed, her storage unit was broken into. And out of the storage unit came information that she was a transgender individual. And because of that, she was fired. Stellar career in every aspect. but a break into her storage unit plus discrimination ended that career. She ends her commentary by saying, had employment non-discrimination laws been in effect, I likely would have continued serving the citizens of Josephine County to this day. And we know from her employment record that she would have been well served. But that was before Oregon adopted anti-discrimination legislation. Many people have written to share their stories. Terry from Aloha wrote, "Thank you for continuing the fight against discrimination. I am retired now, but I did lose a job when I was young for being a lesbian. Until later in life, I stayed deep in the closet to keep from losing another job. All of the non-discrimination bills help us define who we are as a people," she continues, "and underscores our belief in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for every American." By one survey, far more than a third of individuals, LGBT individuals, have experienced some form of harassment or discrimination in the workplace. That's a tremendous impact on the pursuit of happiness. That's a tremendous shrinking of freedom and liberty as envisioned in our founding documents, our vision for this nation. Now, there are a number of issues that have been raised as colleagues have talked about this bill before it comes to the floor here, and I wanted to address some of them. First, this bill is fully inclusive. It includes the lesbian, the gay, the bisexual, and the transgender community. It should be fully inclusive because discrimination is wrong. Discrimination shrinks opportunity. Discrimination is an offense against liberty and freedom in our nation, the full participation in society. So, of course, this bill should be fully inclusive, as it is in 17 of the 21 states that have laws in their books right now. A second issue has been concern about lawsuits. And we heard this yesterday from the Speaker of the House. But we have all of these pilots, if you will, 21 states with measures on the books, all kinds of experience. So I asked the General Accounting Office to do an updated study of the issue of lawsuits. And what do we find out? There's been no abuse. There's been no extraordinary stream of unfounded lawsuits against businesses, no damage to business. None at all. In Oregon, LGBT discrimination claims are less than 2% of the total number of employment discrimination claims. It's less than 1 out of 50. In other states, it's ranged from 2 to 6%. That's a small number. And it's why the business community has remained so supportive. Far more than half, in fact, close to 90% of the Fortune 500 companies have non-discrimination practices that they have adopted on their own. They have adopted it because it's good business. Nike, in my home state of Oregon, says, quote, ENDA is good for business, for our employees, and for our communities. Continues the Nike statement to say that inclusive non-discrimination policies, quote, enable us to attract and retain the best and brightest people around the world. That's why Fortune 500 companies have lined up to adopt non-discrimination provisions. Because what is good for liberty, what is good for opportunity, is good for business. And the GAO study shows that any claim that there has been a problem with excessive lawsuits is simply false. A third concern is about the religious exemption. The religious exemption in this bill is deeply founded on Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So there's a whole history of interpretation and understanding exactly where the boundaries are. This is the same religious exemption that was voted in favor of in the U.S. House of Representatives by a measure of 420 to 25. 420 to 25 said this is the right foundation to make sure that we create the balance for religious organization. There are others who are concerned that simply the American people are not ready for this discussion, despite the fact that it's been adopted in 21 states, despite the fact that we've had many related issues before the American public up for discussion, including hate crimes, the Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Act. We've had Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We've had a Supreme Court discussion about marriage equality. Certainly the Americans are well familiar with this. In fact, 80% of Americans think we've already done this. I was explaining to my daughter, Bryn, about this bill, this fight against discrimination and its terrible impacts on liberty and freedom and opportunity. And she said, but Dad, people can't fire others because they're lesbian or gay, right? She said, that's not possible. And I said, sweetie, it was possible right here in Oregon until a couple years ago, when in 2007 we adopted non-discrimination policies, non-discrimination statutes for our state. And she just shook her head. And it took me back to when I was in high school, and I was hearing about Jim Crow systems of discrimination against those with dark skin instead of lighter skin. And I thought, that's not possible. Not under our vision of opportunity and equality of our Constitution and our pursuit of happiness. It's not possible. But it was possible, and it was very real well after I was born. But we ended that discrimination, and it's time to end this discrimination. This is about the individual, but it's about our nation as well. It's certainly about the vision of the Declaration of Independence that has the promise of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness as the founding motivation. It certainly is about our Constitution that says the core purpose is to secure the blessings of liberty. Because certainly you do not have liberty if you do not have the full opportunity to participate in the workplace across America. Senator Ted Kennedy, who carried this battle until days before his death. In fact, the quote I'm about to share is from August 5th, 2009. He died just 20 days later. This may well have been one of his last public comments. And introducing the 2009 bill may well have been one of his last legislative acts. And he said, "The promise of America will never be fulfilled as long as justice is denied to even one among us." I urge my colleagues, take a stand for equality. Take a stand for fundamental fairness. Take a stand for the vision of the pursuit of happiness embedded in our Constitution. Take a stand for justice for all. Support this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Indiana.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, among the many promises the President made when he and congressional Democrats enacted their unpopular health care law nearly 4 years ago, and by the way, that was enacted without any bipartisan input or support, there was one thing in particular that Americans definitely have not forgotten. It was a promise that President Obama repeated over and over again to the American people at rally after rally. You can't turn on the TV these days without it being played, or the radio, or pick up a newspaper without this being played over and over again, because it was so ingrained in the thoughts of the American people. This promise that the President made so definitively, shouted and pounded on the, if you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan, period. By saying period behind it, it's sort of like it puts the stamp. That's it. No disagreement. If you like your health care plan, you will be able to keep it. Well, here are the facts. This program has been in place for 1 month and a couple of days. Already, at least 3.5 million Americans have received cancellation notices from their insurance companies. Lord knows how many more letters are in the mail, or will be in the mail, arriving at Americans' mailboxes in the coming weeks and months ahead. So, if you like your health care plan, already, and you can keep it, already 3.5 million Americans have been told, no, you can't keep your health care plan. And thousands of Hoosiers have already received those letters, and they'll continue to receive more. Rebecca from Muncie received a letter saying her individual health care plan will be canceled. She's also learned that the premiums in the government-approved plans are double and triple of what she's paying now. Remember, this won't cost 1 penny more. Dwight from Indianapolis wrote to me and shared a similar story. Dwight also received notice in the mail that his health care plan is being terminated. And when he started looking for an alternative government-approved plan, by the way, one of the few that was able to get through the website, he experienced sticker shock, dramatic increases in his premiums that he would have to pay for having his plan terminated, and now has to buy the Obamacare plan. And that sticker shock was felt by Garth in Marion, Indiana as well. Garth told me that his family's health insurance costs will be more than 3 times as much under Obamacare as they're paying now. I'm not sure that, well, I am sure, Rebecca, Dwight, Garth, and tens of thousands of other Hoosiers now have found the promise that they could keep their health care plan if they like it. They found that promise a broken promise. But despite the repeated promise by the President for several years to the American people that you can keep your health care plan if you like it, period, we now have learned that the White House knew all along that this wasn't true. For at least the past 3 years, the White House has known that millions of Americans would receive cancellation notices and lose their current health care coverage. Yet the President has continued to package this flawed product with false advertising and apparently deliberate dishonesty to sell it to the American people. And we wonder why Americans are losing confidence in their government. We wonder why there's such an alarming trust deficit in the country today. As the Washington Post writer Chris Cillizza wrote recently, when you're the President, words matter. Mr. President, words matter. Your words were, if you like your health care plan, you can keep it, period. Mr. President, that was a false promise. And it has undermined the confidence and trust of the American people in this President and in this government. Because the fact is, you can only keep your health care plan if the Obama administration likes that plan, and apparently there's millions already of plans that they don't like. And the ones they do like are their own creation with multiple doubles and triples of premium costs. In 2009, the President also said, we will keep this promise. If you like your doctor, you'll be able to keep your doctor, period. The President keeps enunciating his promises with a period. That means that's it, final. Nothing else to say about it. And the fact is also that under Obamacare, many individuals are not going to have access to their doctors that they've trusted for years. If the White House had been honest with Americans, would the administration have promised that people could keep doctors that they like? And many individuals and families are seeing higher premiums, higher copays, and higher deductibles under Obamacare. If the White House had been honest with Americans, would it have told the public that the health care law would save families up to $2,500? Haven't seen any of those stories yet. And the President's response to all of this, and the millions of Americans who have had their insurance coverage canceled, he says, just shop around. Well, first of all, maybe the President has forgotten that Americans can't even shop around because his website doesn't work. Maybe the President hasn't tried shopping around himself because he and his political appointees are not required to join Obamacare. That's right. Everybody else is forced into Obamacare, but not the President, nor his appointees and his team. They think it's good enough for the American people. So they're not going to be forced to join it as the rest of us are, including members of Congress, which is okay. We should join it. We should be forced to join it. Because if we're going to impose this on the American people, it needs to be imposed on ourselves so that we feel the pain just as they're feeling the pain. But the President, exempted. President's appointees, exempted. What kind of leadership is that? Individuals and families that have been able to shop around are finding that many of the Obama-approved health care policies are going to cost them more money, not less. Middle-class families are getting hit with massive premium increases and outrageous deductibles. Remember, the point of health care reform was to lower the cost of health care and increase access. But we're seeing just the opposite of what the President promised. I think it is now clear that if the White House had been honest with the American people, this law would never have been passed in the first place. It was Abraham Lincoln who once said, if you once forfeit the confidence of your fellow citizens, you can never regain their respect and esteem. It's true that you may fool all of the people some of the time. You can even fool some of the people all of the time, but you can't fool all of the people all of the time. And unfortunately today, many Americans feel like they've been fooled by a series of promises from this administration and its supporters that were simply not true. And given the many problems and broken promises with Obamacare, given the law's negative impact on American families, the sensible course of action at this time is to take a time out from implementation of this law. Recent polling shows that nearly 3 in 4 Americans voters now support delaying Obamacare's individual mandate. In September, I introduced a bill to delay that mandate for a year. The House has already passed similar legislation offered by my Indiana colleague Todd Young to delay both the employer and the individual mandate. And by the way, 22 House Democrats supported that language. So the first step we should take today is to pass this legislation to delay the Obamacare mandates and put people over politics. There's a lot of work ahead to deliver real health care reform. We need to bring down the cost of health care, not raise it. We need to put patients in control of their health care decisions, not Washington bureaucrats. And we need to increase competition, reform medical malpractice, and allow people to buy insurance across state lines, create risk pools, and a number of other initiatives that have been put forward here that would make it an affordable health care reform and not the unaffordable, overpromised, underdelivered health care plan that American people are now having to deal with. Delaying the individual mandate will give the American people an opportunity to voice their displeasure over this false information by the President and the chance to start over with a real, honest approach to health care reform. It's time to start now. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor. Mr. President, I suggest the evidence of the court.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander. The Senate today continuing work on moving ahead with the ENDA bill, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, that would ban employers from using an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity in the process of hiring, firing, salary, or promotions. The same rules would also apply to labor organizations and employment agencies. Senators yesterday voted to move ahead with debate on a motion to proceed to the bill, and we could see vote on final passage later this week.
Mr. President.
Senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be dispensed with, and I be allowed to speak for up to 15 minutes. Mr. President, recently President Obama made the comment that Obamacare isn't just a website. It's much more. Well, I couldn't agree more with that statement. His health care law is also a list of broken promises that harm middle-class Americans. While he was trying to sell Obamacare to the American people, President Obama repeatedly stated that if you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan, period. Well, he didn't say that if you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan unless your health care plan changes, or if you like your health care plan, you can keep your health care plan unless your health care plan gets canceled. He didn't say that you can only keep your health care plan if the White House likes your health care plan. He said, if you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan, period. So pretty emphatic, I would argue, Mr. President, when the President of the United States says something like that, and yet just 1 month now after the Obamacare exchange rollout, at least 3.5 million Americans have received insurance cancellation notices, according to the Associated Press. And that number just reflects the number of drop plans in about 25 states. There are about 25 other states that haven't reported their numbers yet. A report by the American Action Forum cites that this number is expected to dramatically increase in the coming months. On Sunday, former White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs conceded that it was certainly wrong for the President to claim that if you like your plan, you can keep it. The Washington Post fact-checker even gave the President 4 Pinocchios for his oft-repeated pledge that no one will ever take away your health care plan. We're now learning that it's actually only if the White House likes your plan that you're going to be able to keep your plan. We're also learning the White House knew that people would be losing their coverage. After Obamacare was signed into law, the President's administration released regulations that would invalidate grandfathered health care plans if they made routine changes. This information was buried in 2010 regulation. And despite the fact that the administration had posted this regulation, the President continued to state, if you like your health care plan, you'll be able to keep your health care plan. At the time this regulation was released, the administration issued estimates stating that 40 to 67% of Americans who purchased insurance in the individual market would lose their coverage. The administration also stated in that regulation that by the year 2013, 39 to 69% of businesses, large and small, would lose their grandfathered plans. What the President blatantly left out of his promise was the caveat that if the federal government approves of your health care plan, then you can keep it. Not if you like it, you can keep it. If the federal government likes it, then you can keep it. But what we're finding out, Mr. President, is the opposite is true. It is a completely broken promise. Completely. What makes this issue even more startling is that in 2010, Senate Democrats voted along party lines to reaffirm that those Americans who like their plan can only keep it if it receives a government seal of approval. In September of 2010, Senator Mike Enzi from Wyoming proposed a resolution to block the way the administration was preparing to handle plan cancellations. On a party line vote, Democrats killed the resolution, effectively endorsing the administration's proposal to cancel plans individuals have and like. After breaking his oft-repeated promise, the President is now telling millions of Americans who've had their insurance canceled that they should just shop around for policies that could be more costly on a website that does not function. It's clear the administration has misled Americans with their promises. Jerry Buckley of Marion, Arkansas, says he didn't pay attention to any of that because the President kept telling you, this won't affect you if you like what you have. Despite being assured he could keep his plan, Mr. Buckley received a letter from Arkansas Blue Cross Blue Shield saying his policy did not comply with the new regulations under Obamacare. A comparable plan has a higher premium, higher out-of-pocket costs, and less coverage. As the leader of our country, the President's words matter. He needs to be held accountable for these millions of insurance plans that he promised the American people that they could keep. Simply having administration officials apologize for a broken website is not a solution. Madam President, the issues run much deeper than anything any IT expert can fix. This is fundamentally about the flaws in this law, and that's why the cancellation notices continue to go out, despite the President's assertions and promises that if you like your plan, you can keep it. Well, in addition to the cancellation notices, consumers are experiencing sticker shock when they see what plans are available to them this next year. Forbes reports that premiums in 41 states are going to increase under Obamacare. My home state of South Dakota ranks 7th on that list, with premiums rising 77% on average. In 4 states, insurance premiums are expected to rise over 100%. A Washington Post headline from the weekend reads, and I quote, "For consumers whose health premiums will go up under the new law, sticker shock leads to anger," end quote. The article cites an anecdote by an area lawyer, Deborah Persico. Ms. Persico recently found out her insurance plan is being canceled due to Obamacare. Under a comparable plan with the new law, her premium is going to increase by 55%, and her deductible will double. She expects this new plan will cost her at least $5,000 a year more than she pays under her current plan. There are millions of middle-class Americans, just like Deborah, whose health care costs are skyrocketing under Obamacare. Madam President, the rising premiums are affecting both Americans who buy their insurance in the individual market and those who have employer-provided health care as well. In an effort to avoid these higher costs, small businesses are renewing their plans early to avoid requirements imposed by Obamacare. Insurance brokers told USA Today that 60 to 80% of small businesses with less than 50 employees are scrambling to renew their policies before the year's end, the Obamacare prices, for one more year. With our still sluggish economy and unacceptably high unemployment rate, Americans cannot afford Obamacare. This catastrophic law is leading to canceled policies, higher costs, and less coverage. Senate Republicans want to hear your stories. If you've had the plan of your choice canceled and your premiums have skyrocketed, we would ask you all to visit republicans.senate.gov/yourstory. It's now evident that after supporting the rule that led to insurance cancellations, nervous Democrats are beginning to recommend a delay in the individual mandate. It's clear that even those that supported this law in 2009 and 2010 are having second thoughts. But second thoughts, Madam President, aren't enough. We need to work together to repeal this law and replace it with policies that actually lower the cost of care and allow individuals to keep the plans and the doctors that they like. Republicans will continue to fight to protect as many Americans as possible from this train wreck, and we hope that Democrats here in the United States Senate will work with us. Madam President, over the weekend we saw more examples. There was a story, Wall Street Journal, from yesterday about a lady who lost her coverage and can't use her doctor. She's a stage 4 cancer survivor, and she has used health care facilities in her home state of California that have done wonderful things for her in treating her illness. And yet, under the Obamacare policies that are currently in place, she is losing that coverage and losing access to her doctor. The promise that you can keep your plan, if you like it, the promise that you can keep your doctor, if you like your doctor, it is a broken promise that cannot be fulfilled. And the President of the United States, over and over and over again, said if you like your health care plan, you can keep it. Madam President, we know that's not true, and we know it's never going to be true. And we know going back now to 2010, they knew it wasn't going to be true. They were predicting that there were going to be cancellations. They were predicting there was going to be sticker shock. And yet never once did the President modify his statement. He consistently said, if you like your health care plan today, you can keep it, period. Completely misleading. Now millions of Americans who have received cancellation notices and who are seeing skyrocketing premiums, imperiling their ability to cover themselves and their family. There's a better way. There was a better way back then. There's a better way today. Bringing health care costs down, making it more affordable for more Americans, allowing them to have access to the health care plan that they like and to the doctor that they choose. And yet, if we stay on this current path, we are headed for a train wreck. But we have time, Madam President, to turn the train around before this thing is fully implemented. And I hope we'll find cooperation here, bipartisan cooperation, because health care is an important issue to millions of Americans. It is a pocketbook issue that affects so many families across this country. And their ability to provide affordable coverage for themselves and their families is an economic issue and something that everybody talks about at the kitchen table. And so we can come up with a better solution to this. We should come up with a better solution to this. And if we don't, not only will we see millions of Americans with canceled coverage and millions of Americans with dramatic increases in the amount that they're paying for health insurance coverage today, we will also see the impact that this will have on jobs as more and more employers find it more difficult to retain their employees and to hire more workers. And the high unemployment rate, the chronically high unemployment rate that we see today, the historically low labor participation rate, the reduced take-home pay that we've seen for middle-class Americans, those will become a permanent state for the American people. And Madam President, I think the American people want to see us work on policies that will improve their standard of living, improve their quality of life, get more Americans back to work, increase take-home pay for middle-class Americans. This policy takes us backwards. This policy takes us down a track that leads to broken promises and unfulfilled expectations for the American people. It's high time that we change that. We can do that. And I hope that we will find the bipartisan cooperation here and hopefully the engagement of the President of the United States, who, after all, made the promise that if you like your plan, you can keep it, period, repeatedly, over and over and over again. A broken promise, Madam President, but it's not too late to do the right thing. And I hope that we will be able to find the bipartisan cooperation to do that. Madam President, I yield the floor.